Tonight, President Trump parroting Russian propaganda as he falsely accuses Ukraine of starting the war, which began almost 3 years ago when Vladimir Putin's troops invaded Ukraine. I want to bring in our chief national affairs correspondent, Jeff Zeleny. He's traveling with the president in Florida. So, Jeff, what exactly did President Trump say?
Well, if it was some of the sharpest criticism we have heard directed from the Trump administration, or in fact any American president at the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, of course, this is coming on a day when the U.S. and Russia were meeting to talk about the very fate of Ukraine. Zelensky did not have a seat at the table. But the president was asked specifically about that just a short time ago at his Mar-a-Lago resort. He fired back at Zelensky, suggesting that he could have stopped the war 3 years ago.
I think I have the power to end this war, and I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
You could have made a deal. You should have never started, of course. Well, that is not just a misstatement of history, of course. Russia invaded Ukraine, as we all saw and witnessed 3 years ago, nearly to this date. But Russia also has the history of Ukraine. I mean, when during the first Trump administration, their incursion was spreading and growing. But the American president did not stop there. He went on to essentially belittle and question the authority of the Ukrainian president. He said his approval rating was at 4%. There is no evidence to back that up. The latest poll from a couple months or so ago was right around 50%. Never mind that, he also questioned his leadership and said that there should be new elections. Now, of course, there have not been elections in Ukraine because martial law was called because of the Russia invasion. But we'll take it all together here, as this is coming as peace talks are just dramatically intensifying between the U.S. and Russia, as we saw in Saudi Arabia. There's no question that you odd man out here, and Trump was very eager to fire back at Zelensky and certainly not defend him today, Wolf.
Truly outrageous comments. Jeff Zeleny, thank you very much. All of this comes as U.S. and Russian diplomats kickstarted their talks in Saudi Arabia aimed at trying to bring the war to an end without Ukrainian negotiators in the room. Our chief national security correspondent, Alex Marquardt, is joining us now from the Saudi capital of Riyadh. Alex, how is this comment, this latest comment from President Trump, going to be received?
Well, Wolf, this will strike at the deepest fears that the Ukrainians have of how President Trump views the conflict and who is responsible, and concerns over concessions to the Russians. The president here laying blame at the feet of the Ukrainians. You know, he's going beyond the usual anti-Ukrainian talking points of the fact that this war has been dragging on for 3 years and cost the U.S. tens of billions of dollars, going beyond the Russian talking points that, in fact, it was Ukraine who provoked this war by getting too close to NATO, too close to the EU, moving away from Russia, saying here very clearly that this was Ukraine's fault and that Ukraine started it. And Jeff Zeleny is absolutely right. We know that that is not true. We know that it was Russia who launched this war February 24th of 2022. They came in from the north, from the east, and from the south. And so there's no question about that. Where we go from here, it very much remains to be seen. He is essentially undercutting his negotiating team here in Riyadh, just striking statements from the American president that will further raise concerns about the concessions that many accuse the U.S. of giving to Russia at this point without getting anything in return. Wolf.
Alex, what came from the talks between the U.S. and Russian diplomats in Riyadh, where you are, earlier today?
Well, Wolf, this may be remembered as the moment, or one of the moments, that Russia essentially came in from the cold, was recognized again by the West. Here we saw President Putin's top aides sitting across the table from the top American national security officials. The American delegation tried to downplay the fact that the Ukrainians were not there, that the Europeans were not there, downplay the fact that they were just meeting directly with the Russians by saying that you have to meet with adversaries in order to get to a peace deal, arguing that this was just the first step in a very long process. Here's a little bit of what Secretary of State Marco Rubio had to say earlier today.
But we have to understand that it's been 3.5 years since there's been any sort of regularized contact between the United States and Russia. and in some cases between any of the participants in this conflict and Russia. So the goal of today's meeting was to follow up on the phone call the President had a week ago and begin to establish those lines of communication. The work remains. Today is the first step of a long and difficult journey.
A long and difficult path. There were 4 things, according to Secretary Rubio, that the two sides agreed to. The first is to normalize embassy operations. Both the Moscow and Washington embassies from the two sides have essentially been gutted over the last few years. They want to send diplomats and intelligence officials back to their posts. And then specifically, Wolf, both sides are going to be naming a high-level delegation to continue with these Ukrainian negotiations. And then, very interesting, Wolf, they're looking past the end of this conflict, essentially offering Russia a carrot, saying there's an opportunity for historic economic and investment cooperation. So some really interesting points there. But again, Wolf, there is major concern here that U.S. is giving concessions to the Russians. We heard President Trump just hours after these talks wrapped saying that U.S. troops should not be inside Ukraine. This comes at a time when both the Ukrainians and the Europeans are saying that the Americans must absolutely be involved in giving security guarantees to the Ukrainians, and we're hearing otherwise from the American president. Wolf?
Alex Marquardt reporting from Riyadh in Ukraine in Saudi Arabia for us. Thank you very, very much. Joining us now, the former Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman, and CNN contributor Jill Doherty, former CNN Moscow bureau chief. Wendy, let me start with you. What's your reaction, first of all, to President Trump today falsely claiming that Ukraine started this war with Russia?
Well, Wolf, I think you, Jeff, Alex said it. It was outrageous. It is actually so far, and I think Jill, who knows Moscow and Putin quite well, all this administration has done so far is given carrots to Russia. And today, the president put sticks on President Zelensky and Ukraine, when in fact, as you all have said quite accurately, it was Vladimir Putin who horrifically, illegally invaded a sovereign territory and set off this horror show. As you know, Wolf, on January 10th, I led a delegation from the United States to meet with the Russians as a last-ditch effort, even knowing from intelligence that Putin had made the decision to invade because he believes Ukraine belongs to Russia. And so when you hear Senator Wicker say today that he believes that you can't trust Putin, he is actually echoing something that then Senator Rubio said a couple of years ago when he said Putin was a liar and you couldn't trust him. So the fact that the administration has begun with Russia, has given them embassy normalization, saying Ukraine can't get into NATO, saying that in fact no troops from countries who are part of NATO can ever be there as peacekeepers, said by Lavrov today. The administration saying it may take troops out of the Baltics, saying that Zelensky and the European Union can't be at this meeting. All of this is give-me's to Russia and really making it very difficult for President Zelensky. He is trying to humiliate and bedevil Zelensky to take away his confidence. But having been to Ukraine during this war, I can tell you that the Ukrainians are resilient, they are tough, and they will not back down to a just and durable peace.
Jill, let me play that little clip. This is Senator Roger Wicker. He's the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, speaking earlier today. Listen to this.
Any sort of peace talks that might get a fair result would definitely need to have the Ukrainians at the table.
Do you think that Putin can be trusted in these negotiations?
No. Putin is a war criminal and should be in jail for the rest of his life, if not executed.
Pretty strong words. Putin should be in jail for the rest of his life, if not executed. Jill, pretty stunning comments from this Republican senator.
They are, but he's technically correct. Vladimir Putin is a war criminal, according to the International Criminal Court, the ICC. Now, neither Russia nor the United States is a member of the ICC, but technically there is a warrant for the arrest of Vladimir Putin. So I think the senator is absolutely correct. And I have to agree with Wendy Sherman that the negotiations, if the United States is really bringing two sides together, this is really a shocking development because it is putting all of the onus, no criticism on Russia whatsoever. In fact, as we see, Russia got a lot today. And telling Zelensky that he started the war. I was in Moscow February 24th, 2022, and followed it very, very closely. This is precisely what Vladimir Putin says, that it was the Ukrainians who started it. But I don't know, we have to beat a dead horse here. It's quite obvious. The proof is there. The video is there. And the world really does know that Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. And he wanted to take over the country and get rid of President Zelensky.